Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. Momentarily, I will be joined by Lane Kawaoka, and we'll be discussing the Wealth Elevator. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Lane, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bruce.
It is my pleasure. Please take a moment or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Yeah, so we operate real estate syndications. We buy multifamily apartments, some hotels nearby yourself. Currently own 10,000 units, $2.1 billion. But my big passion and kind of where we started this all was just buying little rental properties, and I chronicle this on my podcasts and the new book, The Wealth Elevator.
So what is this wealth elevator?
Yeah, so for a lot of folks who are, their first, I call it the first generation millionaire, right? People who have good, sound financial skills, don't spend more than they make, and have decent enough jobs or run their own businesses. There's not too much information and content out there for people who, are kind of stepping up to that next level. There are a lot of books out there written mainly for folks who don't have very much money and don't have very much income. Call it the financial advice for the masses out there. And this is kind of where I realized as I was kind of, climbing up the stairs, didn't know about the wealth elevator yet, that there's different mindsets and different type of strategic strategies along the way based on what floor you are at in this wealth elevator building.
It's interesting. You just said the word stairs. And there's a difference between stairs and an elevator. An elevator takes you up. Stairs, you take yourself up. So is this a process that manages you like an elevator, or is it a process that you manage like a flight of stairs?
Well, it's a process that either way you have to manage yourself, right? It's this whole personal accountability, and you have to kind of do what's right. But there's certain best practices that I've kind of discovered just by trial and error myself. When I first started, like I said, I was kind of taking the stairs. I was making progress. I graduated college in 2007 and got an engineering degree, started to work as a construction supervisor, project manager, and I was saving maybe $50 to $100,000 a year. At that time, investing in the 401k, Roth IRAs, all the stuff that we were taught to do,
Mhm.
and buy a house to live in, right? All this traditional financial advice out there. And this is kind of where very early on I, rented my home out, kind of did an early house hack, as people call it today. And this is kind of where my aha moment came, where I started to realize, wow, this is how the wealthy build wealth, buying little rental properties. So I expanded my portfolio in 2000 and, from 2010 to 2015, expanded my portfolio to 11 single family home rental properties, these remote rental properties. And that was kind of where I realized, and I put this in the book, and we actually have, charts and tables separating these different floors that, you know, I had crested over accredited investor status at that point, $1 million net worth and greater. And the little rental properties just weren't scalable. They were too much of a headache. And I need to transition myself to being more of an accredited investor and invest in more accredited investing type of investments. And this is where I discovered syndications and private placements where investors can, invest in large commercial assets, commercial quality assets, and be a LP in, not taking all the legal liability that I had when I had 11 single family homes with, a dozen tenants in there. You can make a lot of money doing that, but it just at some point, the liability just becomes too much. And this is kind of where a part of this was just meeting other high net worth accredited investors. When I was first starting out, I didn't know any, rich uncles or accredited investors that were on the second floor of the wealth elevator already. It was not only until I walked up the stairs myself and discovered, all these people out there doing the same thing. And that was kind of where I realized this trifecta of strategies, investing in alternative investments through syndications, the tax strategies of the wealthy using passive losses to offset their passive income, real estate professional status, and then, using whole life overfunded infinite banking solutions to kind of privatize their own banking as this trifecta of strategies that the wealthy use to kind of get them, past $1 million to 8 figures and beyond.
Now, sometimes when I try to explain the United States to foreigners, I say that it's really, if I remember correctly, 9 different regions. Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, the Deep South, the Midwest, Texas, California, the West, Alaska, 9, and Hawaii, where you are. Is there anything that you're telling us that is unique to Hawaii that will not work in, for lack of a better expression, the lower 48? Or the mainland, as you may call it?
Yeah. Well, I just live here in Hawaii. We mainly invest all of the 10,000 units are either in, we call these emerging markets, right? And this is kind of in the details of the deal sections, Arizona, Houston, Dallas, Huntsville, Alabama is our market. We've got some stuff in Florida. Predominantly, we'll invest in red states because, as the landlords, we like the landlord tenant laws on our side. And typically the red states tend to have a little bit better job growth and population growth than, the Northeast tends to be a little bit lagging on population growth up there. Those are some of the high level, how when we start to pick geographic areas to invest. But I think one of the big investment theses that I kind of go off of is investing in things that cater towards the lower middle class and maybe a bit of the shrinking middle class out there, which is the subset of America that, with immigration and, unfortunately, the rich are getting richer and the poor and majority of people are getting poor. And this is kind of why we invest in workforce housing type of apartments. It's becoming very clear that, people spending $900 a month, $1,200 a month in rent is, that subset of the population is growing. Of course, that's adjusting for inflation. But, obviously we try and stay away from the very low end type of tenants. We don't want to be slumlords for sure. We've done that in our past. It's just not worth it. But we definitely don't want to be on the high end, right? Because in recessions, the high end people are kind of, they lose their job and there's just trickling down effect where A-class tenants will move to B-class areas and then the Bs will move to the Cs. And that's where we like to kind of stay within this high C, B type of clientele base. And as we look into the future, places for people to live, it's not, industry that's going to be displaced anytime soon, unless the government chooses to just build globs and globs of government housing, which I don't see happening. And it's just a fundamental need that people need, apartments and places to live.
I've had a number of real estate investors on, and 2 that come to mind or gentleman who invests in low-income housing and rents it out, which is what you're talking about, if I understand correctly, not to be a slumlord, fixes them up, makes them a quality place to raise a family. You know, your first rental, your second rental. And then there was somebody else who just invests in land. And in his case, it was a little different in that it's you find a piece of land, you do your due diligence, you make sure there are no buried oil tanks. I'm sure it's the same in Hawaii. There are all sorts of laws about what's under the land and not just on the land. And you keep it for 30 years. And that's your plan going in. You're going to keep it for 30 years and then you're going to sell it. In your case, do you look for long-term investments or for short-term investments that you're going to be able to, for lack of a better word, flip?
Yeah, I mean, we buy land too, but mainly for our developments. So we put together our new builds, or we build ground up. But I think it at the end of the day, when you look at it, it's what kind of business are you in? Like, we are in the business of construction and what's essentially called value add. Whether you're buying a business and increasing the income by adding more customers or decreasing expenses, that's the type of value add in a a business. For us, it's when we take over an apartment, we'll put some new appliances in, new paint job, new playground equipment, fix the roof, fix the parking lot, things that will improve the assets so that tenants will pay a little bit more than what they did. And overall, that increases the net operating income. For business owners out there, you guys understand this is EBITDA. So that's the business that we are in. When we increase the net operating income of an asset, we in turn increase the market value very drastically. And at that point, when we've done all the fix-ups, the checklists across the property of things that we can value add to increase the revenue or decrease expenses, that point we've kind of fattened the pig up as much as we can, and we sell it, right? So it's kind of a hybrid strategy in a way. We're not in it for like a quick flip where we sell it in less than a year or two. Typically, we're like on a 5-year time horizon. We don't want to hold on to these properties for over a decade because at some point, these properties, they just get a little old. You don't want to be the guy holding on to a 1940s, 1950s properties once it becomes too far beyond repair. But just like I said, we do own land. We buy barren land. At that point, you're not really doing any value add to it, and that's why some people will do it because it's very stable. That said, you don't make very much money doing that type of stuff. But what we'll do is we'll build. We just completed a 200 unit in Huntsville, Alabama, and now we rented each unit out for about $1,400 a month. Workforce housing type of units that's considered Class A, but tremendous amount of value add, right? It's obvious, right? It went from a barren piece of land to each square foot generating $1 to $2 a square foot every single month. So that's kind of the business you're in, and it's kind of like on a fundamental level, right? Like if you're in the business of doing value add, increasing the value of that piece, it makes sense when you're done doing the value add to go ahead and sell that thing, right? Because you've maximized the value, at least for time, than to kind of hold on to it. Now, we're in the business of value adding, as I said. Therefore, we're not inclined to hold on to anything too long, as our value is to kind of, rinse, wash, repeat, and going into the next value add project.
Now, if you've increased the value, so you took over a property that wasn't a dump, but needed to be repaired, so you demolished what needed to be demolished, you painted, you put in a new roof, you did whatever you had to do, you mentioned new appliances. You increased the value, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a question, you decrease the expenses. Because now the tenant's not going to call you up and say, my roof is leaking, the refrigerator just blew up. The parking lot now has a sinkhole in it. You've invested in the property in order to decrease the inevitable expenses that you would have incurred had you not made that investment.
On one level, I think, you know, that kind of logic makes sense, right? Like we fix the roof, now we don't have to pay $4,000 a month on repair patches here and there, or we fix the chiller system and now we don't have to contend with little pipe bursts here or there. However, most cases the expenses do increase, you know, where the income is the one that's outpacing the expense increase. Basically, from one way of thinking of it is like what we're going in is like we want to create a better product for our customers who are our tenants. Therefore, we are going to have to spend more money, you know, even after the CapEx happens on a monthly basis on the operation budget to upkeep that better product. But it's going to cost, we're going to generate much more revenue month after month after month. It's the same concept of like, you know, take Disneyland, for example. You know, that thing just gets better and better, right? Every year, the product gets better and better. And as people can imagine, their expenses keep going up because the product gets better. But the good business operator that, you know, say what you think from the company, but from a park standpoint, the margin is the important thing, right? The increase in income is should outpace the increase in expenses. And that's kind of hits it from another level, right? Like, you know, we want to make returns for our investors. And the way we do that is value adding the asset, doing the construction, bumping up the rents. Expenses will increase because the product is getting better and the upkeep for the product. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're making better living conditions for the tenants that are in there. I mean, I always see it as like you have 100-unit property, you're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe drug dealers or just shady people that live there. And I always think of it from a utilitarian point of view of the majority of the tenants in there are good people. They may not make that much money, but they certainly enjoy when they see those people who can't afford the slightly higher rents to be removed from the property. When we go and renew leases, you know, we're checking backgrounds and, you know, if people are a bad character, we just don't renew them. And this is kind of overall the community gets better. And at the end of the day, sure, on paper, the income increase and the net operating increase, but at the end of the day, the community got better for the tenants. And, you know, that way they feel good about paying more for rent, right? Just like how I'm sure many of us, you know, maybe we grumble that Disneyland is getting more and more expensive, but the product has improved from what it was.
True. Well, I know it just happened to me last week. My rent went up 5%. Now it goes up 5%. Well, that's not true. It used to only go up 3%. Now it's going up 5% every year. But they make improvements and they make repairs and the place is safe and it's clean and it's neat. And I'm satisfied. How do you know that there's I'm not talking about a dump. I'm talking about something that appears to be decent. How do you know that it's a property you don't want to have anything to do with for any amount of money?
Yeah, I mean, you know, call us fair weathered investors, but we tend to buy properties that have better than 85 to 90% occupancy. You know, there's a lot of investors out there that have the business plan of going into dumps and dilapidated properties and resurrecting that thing from the dead and doing huge amounts of value add there. That's just not our type of strategy. You know, when we were first got it started, that's what we would do. We'd buy little 40 units and 50 unit properties. You know, I can recall, you know, we owned one property in Fort Worth, Texas. It was like a 150 unit property. What, you know, collections, you know, out there are like 80%. So like for out of 10 tenants, you have a couple of people that just routinely never pay you. It sounds crazy, right? But for those people who are landlords with B and C type of clientele, very understandable. And this was a culture shock for me when I owned, you know, rental properties in Atlanta and Birmingham in my earlier days doing this. You know, when you tend to get a little bit better clientele, that number drastically goes down to about 1 to 5% of non-collections. But that's kind of where over the years, you know, certainly after 2018, we kind of went in with an idea of, well, let's go after properties that aren't, you know, where the clientele just isn't, you know, gives us that much trouble. And typically those properties, like we want to be in a community where there's already a good standing and reputation out there. AKA, we don't want to be known as the drug dealer apartment complex, right? And the crime complex. So typically that, you know, from a high level, that means, you know, going into properties with 85, 90% occupancy. The other secondly reason for that is that now we can qualify for great government financing at that point. And that is the way, and this is coming from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Now, this is kind of a big aha moment for me when I first started to do this. I'm like, why is the government subsidizing, you know, these seemingly wealthy investors buying these large apartment complexes? Well, this is America's way of kind of, you know, tackling the problem of the growing gap in wealth and, you know, the price of housing, right? What the way they do that is they give us favorable loans for us to go in there and provide good quality housing for the lower middle class.
I received an eviction notice that said that well, it wasn't an eviction notice. It was a notice that because I had not paid my rent, my lease was not going to be renewed. So I went to the management company, to the management office. It was a mistake, and I knew it was a mistake, and I could prove that it was a mistake. There was no, I wasn't even upset about it. And I went in and I said, well, since I'm being evicted for all intents and purposes because I haven't paid my rent in the last, I forget, whatever it was, 3 months, I said, does that mean you're going to give me back the 3 months rent that I actually did pay? And they all laughed and they apologized profusely. And it was all, how did we make this mistake? It's a good thing it was Bruce and not somebody else. But there's a difference. What surprised me was that it wasn't really evicting me, it was just not renewing the lease. So the eviction laws, they explained to me in New Jersey, that it takes forever to evict somebody. But if you haven't paid your rent, it's a different story. They can just, we're not renewing the lease, and then they kick you out. Is that the general rule across the United States?
Well, I mean, again, we're just the investors and asset managers. Every little jurisdiction is a little bit different.
So you're not property
Typically,
managers.
we hire property managers on our behalf. Typically, we'll pay them under 5% to manage our assets. But really, that's kind of where we employ these professionals who are experts at those specific questions and specific jurisdictions. But I will speak from, you know, from a high level. Generally speaking, you know, you're up in, you know, the Northeast, a more bluer state type of area. A lot of the landlord laws are going to be more slighted in your tenant position, right? You know, in Georgia or Texas, you don't pay, you can't stay. 30 days, you're out. So
It ain't like that in Jersey.
no, no, and that's why we don't invest there.
Understand? But on the other hand, you're missing out on something because I'm in one networking group with a commercial real estate, I don't know, broker agent. I've never understood the difference between the two. And he gave us an interesting fact that a third of the population of the United States is within 600 miles of New Jersey, and that's why you can't find an empty warehouse in New Jersey to save your life. This is the hub for, what are they called? For the fulfillment centers. So that's just in case you're ever thinking of leaving the residential and going into commercial, there are some advantages to New Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, we do industrial storage and industrial leaseback in secondary markets, but maybe I'll explain it like this: like there are primary, secondary, and tertiary markets out there. The primary markets are your sexy markets: New York, New Jersey, California, Hawaii, Seattle, Washington. A lot of these markets are categorized as very low cap markets, very secure markets, high demand markets, but your cash flow that you're going to get based off of the property value is going to be very low. So a lot of these
And
types
they're
of
all red
markets,
states that you listed.
well, a lot of those are going to be more of your bluer states too, your primary markets, like
New York, California.
blue states.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right.
So
Right. I'm sorry.
yeah, so in these types of markets, the prospects for the properties to appreciate due to the higher demand is going to be more likely, right? And that's to your point, right? That's why one would invest in primary markets. However, your cash flow is not going to be as strong as more as a secondary or tertiary market. So examples of secondary markets might be, you know, Phoenix, Arizona, or a Houston, Texas, or a, you know, Oklahoma City, like these, Kansas City, like these less sexy markets, still major cities, right?
Mhm.
Then you get to some tertiary markets like a Huntsville, Alabama, Waco, Texas, and you know, there you get even more cash flow, but less stable, prominent markets, right? So again, it comes down to your business plan as an investor. Are you in it for the appreciation, which is somewhat luck based, or are you in it for the monthly cash flow? And you know, there's no right answer here. It depends on kind of where you're at. Because we are in the value add type of business plan, we want to sort of hedge ourselves on a month-to-month basis, which is why we like to set up shop in areas where we can cash flow on a monthly basis. So just in case there's any type of market correction or pandemic or who knows what's going to happen next, that we can kind of fall back on the cash flow as opposed to, you know, I think, you know, one good exercise, what people can do, you know, if they're thinking about, you know, getting into the landlord game is figure out what the rent to value ratio on their property. You know, places like California or New Jersey, you might buy a property for $500,000 that rents for $2,500 a month. So you take that monthly rental price divided by the purchase price, and that's the rent to value. In that case, you know, 2,500 divided by 500,000 would be 0.5%. In many of these, you know, secondary and tertiary markets, you're looking at rent to value ratios above 1%, therefore better to cash flow. So, you know, that's kind of where if you're under that 1% threshold, unless you're putting a whole bunch of money as a down payment, which may not make sense, you're probably going to be bleeding cash on a month-to-month basis. That said, to your earlier point, you have a higher prospect for market appreciation to come up.
Lane, before we started, I made you two promises. The first was when you said that it was sunny and chilly in Hawaii and that it was 74 degrees, I think you said. Given that it's sunny and chilly here and in the mid 40s, I said I was going to ask you nasty questions and embarrass you. I did not, I hope you'll agree that I did not keep that promise. But the second promise was we wouldn't go over half an hour. And as we are coming up on half of an hour now, I want to share your contact information. I want to thank you profusely for coming on. This has been very interesting, and I appreciate it. I'm sure our viewers do. One final question. Is there anything that I did not ask you that you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
Yeah, I would just say, I think they're very quietly, the wealthy people do things very differently. However, it's not something that the average American can't implement themselves, right? Investing off of Wall Street in more alternative investments directly with the operator sponsor within a syndication and private placement, and then what that does, it triggers a lot of these other tax savings measures that we really didn't get into today. But yeah, if you guys are interested in this, check out the book on Amazon, The Wealth Elevator, and got a podcast, The Wealth Elevator. And if you got any specific questions, feel free to reach out, lane@thewealthelevator.com.
Lane, thank you again. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers do as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bruce. Bye.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching. And as always, please stay focused on success.